Revolutionary greetings, comrades. I am Mabuto Nicholas Mabena. In this video we ask, can street protest drive a regime out of power? Can we have a change of government through mass action? We saw what happened in Kenya some time last year when young people took to the streets over the financial bill. Yes, they did achieve their objective in terms of the government of Kenya having a rethink on the finance bill, and to an extent that there was a cabinet reshuffle. But President Ruto remained in power. We saw what happened in Swaziland some few years ago, where young people took to the streets, demanding an end to the monarchy system in Eswatini. SADC had to intervene. The democratic forces were closed out of those meetings. The Mswati regime is still in power. We saw in Mozambique, soon after elections, the protest by young people in Mozambique taking to the streets. Later on, the protest died. Frelimo is still in power. We have had a number of protests in Zimbabwe, but ZANU-PF remains in power. The only time that there was a change of leadership was when the army took to the streets. But the mass of the people themselves could not remove ZANU-PF from power. Recently, the war veterans have been calling for mass action, as seen on the 31st of March 2025. Yes, there was a successful stay away, but ZANU-PF is still in power. So can protest or mass action drive the regime out of power? Or we should use mass action as a tool to demand electoral reforms? Because in the three countries that I gave, four including Zimbabwe, used as examples, the governments are still in power. So what would be our strategy going forward? Because it's becoming clearer that unless there's the involvement of the military, ZANU-PF will remain in power. Street protests on their own are not enough to drive ZANU-PF out of power. And we are saying ZANU-PF because removing ZANU-PF from power is the first step in resolving the Zimbabwean crisis. With the ZANU-PF in power, we cannot resolve the Zimbabwean crisis. It's 45 years after independence. ZANU-PF has destroyed almost everything in Zimbabwe. Now, street protests they are on their own, or mass action, where the war veterans will call for mass action using social media, people stay at home, are not enough. We know that elections are rigged in Zimbabwe. But we think that while we have done enough to ensure that there can be a change of government through an election, we still believe that more can be done to realize that dream. That indeed ZANU-PF can be removed from power through an election. There are many, of course, who will argue and say you need to engage ZANU-PF militarily to remove it from power. I've been reading a book by a Rhodesian soldier titled The Rhodesian War. It is not easy in this part of the world. It is not easy to win political power through the barrel of a gun without negotiations. We did not achieve that in 15 years when we engaged in a bush war. Namibia did not achieve that when it engaged in a bush war. South Africa did not achieve that. Angola did not achieve that. In Mozambique and Angola, of course, we needed to have a coup in Portugal for them to gain independence. So we needed to negotiate to end the war of national liberation and then go to an election. So to then say that it is only the gun that can liberate us might not be accurate given the examples that we have before us, particularly the bush war that those before us fought. Some of us were still young during that time. So the mass action must be used as a tool to mobilize the people of Zimbabwe, force government to hold a democratic election. Of course, it's difficult to have a democratic election, but mass action must be a tool that is used to force electoral reforms, to implement electoral reforms. If we were to remove ZANU-PF from power, what we have not done as the opposition, as we discussed previously, is that we have not studied the electoral system, particularly in rural areas. What we have done, we have paid more attention to the working class communities, which are the strongholds of the opposition, where we'll have election monitors or agents in every polling station. But we have not gone in rural communities, in farming communities, to establish political structures for the opposition, which these political structures will be key on election day. Because an election, as we have demonstrated in the past, an election cannot be rigged on election day if they are pulling agents from the opposition. An election gets rigged when in a polling station it is only ZANU-PF that is present. So the mass action must be used as a tool. For it to be an effective tool, there must be a progressive movement that is established, or the party must have structures in every community if we are to remove ZANU-PF from power. If we are having, say, as an example, 10,000 polling stations countrywide, we must have more than 30,000 polling agents, volunteers, that are saying, if it takes us 3 days or a week to be in a polling station, so be it. We need these more than 30,000 volunteers who will be available in polling stations across the country. Because when we cast our votes, whenever elections are going to be held, election results are posted outside the polling station. in the presence of everyone. What were failed in the past, which I experienced when I was doing political work in Zimbabwe. I remember when we went to a campaign in farming communities. In some cases, we were simply going to the wards in farming communities to recruit a person to be a council candidate because we did not have political structures at the grassroots. Having a structure in Mbare, in Magwegwe, in Sakuva, wherever in urban centers, it is not enough. We need structures in communities. So the mass action, where people have been galvanized around the M31 movement, if the army, and I'm saying this, I'm starting to read again the book 2 weeks in November. If the army, the military, does not take to the streets, ZANU-PF will not go, or the faction that wants to remove Emmerson Mnangagwa will not be removed. So we need to mobilize the mass of the people into a political structure in all communities, where we're having these volunteers who are going to be at the polling station. We need to mobilize the mass of the people to have confidence in the electoral process. Because the ZANU-PF knows that if there is confidence by the mass of the people in the electoral process, it will lose power. So it will use social media to try and persuade the people through propaganda that people should not have confidence in the electoral system. Once people have no confidence in the electoral system, they are not going to register as voters. On election day, they are not going to cast their votes. And this gives ZANU-PF a huge advantage. We have so many people in the diaspora. Yes, parties that are represented in the Zimbabwean parliament have no interest in the diaspora vote. But we have to counter that. That Zimbabweans in South Africa, in Botswana, in Mozambique, in Namibia, in the rest of the SADC region, they must go physically to Zimbabwe and register to vote. And that on election day, they must travel and cast their votes. So the mass action, as I conclude, as the war veterans are currently leading it, is to say it must be a tool, a political tool, to raise the consciousness of the people of Zimbabwe. To say, yes, we need mass action. But mass action alone, as history teaches us, will not remove Emmerson Mnangagwa as president, will not remove ZANU-PF from power. It is an election that can remove. If all of us who are anti-ZANU-PF register as voters, all of us volunteer as election agents, all of us put resources in mobilizing communities around this political agenda to bring about much needed change. We'll continue with this discussion. Please write in the comment section, like this video, subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you're on TikTok, please do follow us. Otherwise, Amandla Comrades.